Jesus Christ actually existed, actually walked this world, did predict his own death and resurrection, and then if you could have a camera running on the tomb in and around 33 AD, that an actual Jesus would have walked out on the third day after his crucifixion and burial.
Now, again, to play devil's advocate,
Wes Huff just went on Piers Morgan, and Piers in this section of the video is playing devil's advocate, quite literally, and it allows for this amazing section of conversation because basically Piers asks all the questions that come up on this YouTube channel, in the comment section, etc., that people seem to think have never been asked before. Luckily, they have been, and luckily, Wes provides some good answers here. I'm really looking forward to sharing those answers with you all, and then I'll kind of step in periodically to round out some of the rough edges as well. So let's get into it.
What's interesting about your perspective on this from your history and your studying is that you believe a lot of the New Testament is unarguably factually true.
I do, yeah, and I think that that's demonstrable from the actual evidence that we can look at.
Is it indisputable to you that Jesus Christ existed, for example?
Oh, definitely so. I think we can say pretty unequivocally that a character, a first century Jewish itinerant rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, did walk the dusty streets of first century Roman occupied Judea. I think that even the most skeptical scholars will grant that if we know very little about Jesus, we know that he did exist and that he was crucified in and around the beginning of the first century under the overseeing of the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate.
I mean, even a super, super basic Google search of what percentage of scholars believe Jesus existed will show you virtually all scholars, including historians, Bible scholars, and those studying ancient history, agree that Jesus existed as a historical figure. The Christ myth theory, which claims Jesus was a mythical figure, is considered a fringe theory with virtually no support among scholars. Here's some elaboration of that. Look into it for yourself. But we're off to a good start here.
Eyewitness testimony notoriously is unreliable. It's the least credible evidence in a courtroom these days, for example. And since the historical method doesn't deal with miracles, it's ridiculous, people say, to base any history on it. And even Matthew's gospel tells us when Jesus appeared in front of his 11 disciples, some of them doubted, to which people say, well, if even not all his disciples believe this, why on earth should we?
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on there. In terms of the historical method and how we actually evaluate things, we only have witness testimony. You know, you do have something that's very different than a courtroom in a modern legal setting, right? Even something like hearsay. Well, all of ancient history in one sense is hearsay, but that doesn't apply when we apply it to the historiographical method. We need to use the same standards that when we would look at something like, say, the biographies of Tiberius with Velleius Paterculus, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassiodeo, when we have multiple instances of reporting on someone's life, we look at both the things that they agree on and the things maybe where they have a differentiation in detail, and then we try to the best of our ability explain some of the different instances that are going on. Now, I would say, you know, to the accusation, well, these are just ancient, illiterate people, that's what C.S. Lewis referred to as chronological snobbery. You know, just because people are ancient neither means they're stupid nor that they don't know what's going on. And what we have in terms of this event is really early on after Jesus's death, we have an explanation of what if the resurrection didn't take place, what we would expect. The 11 disciples are hiding in the upper room. They're scared. They're aware of other messianic movements in the ancient world. Individuals like Simon Bar Giora, who claimed to be the Messiah when his movement was squashed. So when he died, when he died, his movement was squashed. And so I think we have to look at, okay, what explains these 11 scared disciples then going on to not just proclaim that Jesus did rise from the dead, but actually went to the point of risking their lives in persecution. And some of them did die for that proclamation. And so I think it's not outside of the realm of possibility for history to actually be able to evaluate this evidence and say, okay, we have these questions. How then do we explain something like an empty tomb, or even Jesus's disciples go back and the account of the Pentecost happens in Jerusalem. So Jesus' disciples go back to the scene of the crime in the town where people would have saw him crucified, and now they're proclaiming he's resurrected. Well, why would you go back to the place where people could have actually known what actually happened, especially if you're trying to be disingenuous or dishonest? And then that's where it happens. And Stephen is the first martyr. That also happens in Jerusalem. That would have been a warning shot across the bow for the disciples if they wanted to continue on proclaiming these things.
The simplest way to articulate the problem that Wes is poking at would be to ask someone, theoretically, if Christianity is true, if Jesus did rise from the dead, if Jesus really did do all of the miraculous deeds that the New Testament accounts record him doing, how could history convince you of these realities, of these facts? And if the answer is it couldn't, history couldn't convince me, then what we've done is we've exposed a bias, a reductive worldview that inhibits someone from actually arriving at truth. I've been calling it the fool's gambit. You're sacrificing something in the short term for something in the long term, right? In a gambit. But in this scenario, you're actually sacrificing history in order to arrive at the conclusion that Christ wasn't risen. Another thing I wanted to hit on a practical note really quick is that there's basically 900,000 subscribers to this channel, and we each spend about $100 a month on everyday essentials. Collectively, that's almost $100 million a month that flow to massive corporations like Amazon, Target, Johnson & Johnson, etc. The problem that I have with that is that many of these companies support agendas and causes that directly oppose our values, that directly oppose a biblical worldview, and they actually act on it, right? They actually do things with that money. They take that money and they use it to fund agendas that actually make the world a worse place. Things like supporting Planned Parenthood, radical ideologies, etc., right? In light of this, what I have done is made a change. I've started buying from an American-made, family-owned manufacturer that aligns with what I believe in more so. The reason I'm talking about it here on YouTube is I realize if I do this out of my personal conviction, good for me. But if I can convince you to do this with me, then we can actually maybe make a dent in terms of flowing money away from some of these insane agendas. Maybe it's a small way in which we can impact the culture for the good. If you are interested to learn more about this, then click the link in the description or go to switchwithbrandon.com, and someone from this very community will reach out to you and help get all your questions answered about the ins and outs and logistics of this whole thing. So check it out. Thank me later. Now let's get back to this conversation.
What do you say when people say, well, look, there are parts of the New Testament that allude to Jesus as never been the Son of God, and then there are parts where he appears to be God himself? How do you counter that argument that there's an inconsistency there?
Yeah, so Son of God is a title that is reserved for not differentiating Jesus from God. In John's gospel in particular, we have instances where Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of God in a way that actually has the Jews picking up stones to stone him. And when he says, what are these good works are you going to stone me for? They say, not for your good works, but because you call Jesus your Father, making yourself equal with God. And, Jesus then, he doesn't say, oh, no, you've misunderstood me. My Muslim friends like to point out that there are multiple sons of God throughout the Bible. David was referred to as a son of God. But what's unique is that despite there being, sometimes my Muslim friends like to say, sons by the tons, despite that reality, that Jesus is not claiming to be a son of God, he's claiming to be the Son of God in a unique way that not only puts him on equal footing with the Father, but in this monotheistic context of ancient Judaism, actually ascribes to himself honors, attributes, names, and deeds that only God himself has the right to hold. And so the Jews throughout the New Testament, throughout Jesus's ministry and his goings on, they aren't confused by the things he says. When he, at the beginning of Mark's gospel, when he forgives the sins of a person, their response is, who can forgive sins but God alone? And they're exactly right. Only God can forgive our sins. And so Jesus is, in his kind of answer, saying, I'm doing this so that you know that the Son of Man can forgive sins. It's not a correction. That's a reframing in saying, yes, you're right. Only God can forgive sins. That's what I'm doing. Who does that make me?
Jesus' favorite title for himself was actually Son of Man, not Son of God, which might seem counterintuitive. See, he's just a Son of Man, just a mere Son of Man. Well, not so fast. This goes back to Daniel 7. And all of the original audience, to Wes's point, would have understood the meaning of Jesus calling himself the Son of Man. I saw in the night vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. You can imagine why they were probably so offended when Jesus said that he is this Son of Man at the right hand of the Ancient of Days, the Godhead presented before mankind. What an audacious claim. Go figure, it led to the outcome that it did. Let's continue.
I've seen Ricky Gervais on various talk shows. He's one of the world's most famous atheists. And he says, look, there are 3,000 gods if you add them all up from all the religions. Who's to say your one's the real one? And what about the others then? Do they not exist? Are they not real gods? In other words, his position is, look, you can't all be right unless there are 3,000 different versions of a supernatural spiritual being overseeing us all. What do you say to him?
Yeah, well, I think it's a rather foolish argument in that competition doesn't negate objective reality. So say we're using a courtroom analogy. If someone was convicted of a crime here in the city of Toronto, where I live, and he stood before a judge and he said, really, you think I committed this crime? Do you know how many people are in the city? We have 3 million people in this city. And you think I'm the one who did the crime? Really? Out of all the, how many people are in Toronto? How many people are in Ontario? How many people are in Canada? How many people are in North America? You really think that given the amount of people that are, I'm the one who committed the crime? We wouldn't then look at the judge and say, well, that's a good argument. Have you really thought about how many other people are around who, just because this particular individual you think committed the crime? Really? Well, no, we don't just arbitrarily, pick someone, or in the case of Christianity, pick a God. We believe that the God of the Bible is the true God based on the evidence of not just what we find in the Bible, but, the fine-tuning of the universe, of the morality in the objective reality of this world, and the fact that we are, Piers, people who operate with morals, with meaning and intention, and have intrinsic worth. But we look at these things and we don't arbitrarily pick Yahweh, the God of the Bible, over Zeus and Thor and Allah and Buddha. We do it, I would argue, based on the concrete, publicly available evidence that points to the truth claims that I would argue Christianity answers in regards to the ultimate questions we have.